Well, the Sussex's soap opera rolled into town this week, 8 years after Harry and Meghan last came down under in a trip they called the catalyst for leaving the royal family. Sky News contributor Louise Roberts has more.
If there's one thing we Australians cannot stomach, it is being played for fools. And this week, our BS monitors are off the Richter scale.
In April of 2026, as Prince Harry and Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, made their way through Melbourne, Canberra, and Sydney on a privately funded 4-day visit to Australia, the world watched. Cameras followed them into hospital wards and war memorials and mental health conferences. Headlines tracked their movements in hourly cycles. And in London, at Kensington Palace, the heir to the British throne said nothing. Not one word. That silence, this video will argue, was not merely a decision. It was a declaration. To understand what was declared and why it matters, we need to go back, not to April 2026, not even to the beginning of the Australia tour, but to the fundamental question that has hovered over the relationship between these two brothers for the better part of a decade. The question is not whether they love each other. The question is whether love, in this particular situation, can coexist with the obligations each man has chosen to place at the center of his life. For William, those obligations run in one direction, toward the institution, toward his children, toward the continuity of an institution he has dedicated his entire adult life to protecting. For Harry, they run elsewhere, toward a narrative of personal liberation, toward a life built in California, toward the conviction that the institution he grew up in demanded too high a price from the people inside it. Those two positions have been pulling in different directions since at least 2020.
Harry and Meghan's visit is, and I quote, absolutely unacceptable. So what a word, right? ATM machine, right? A cash machine. I didn't know they were coming. They're my least favourite royals. And the visit is unacceptable. It goes on. Another top politician, David Limbrick, who does not pull his punches, has said, if people want to spend thousands of dollars on former royals, that is fine, but Victorian taxpayers should not be on the hook to provide for the security of millionaires.
There is a lot of anger in Australia over this week's visit by Prince Harry and Meghan. They are promoting their favorite causes and talking about life in California. But some critics don't want to hear it. They say they are just out to make money. Holly Williams looks at the couple causing a stir down under.
What the Australia tour of April 2026 did was clarify, with unusual sharpness, how far apart they now stand. Let us begin with the visit itself, because it is important to understand what actually happened before we examine how the palace received it. Harry and Meghan arrived in Melbourne on Tuesday, the 14th of April, 2026, flying business class on a commercial Qantas Airways flight from Los Angeles. This detail, commercial business class rather than private charter bus, was noted by their team as evidence of a more modest, accessible approach. It was a point that was simultaneously genuine and strategic, as most things in the Sussex communications operation tend to be. They were accompanied by a modest personal staff and a level of private security that nonetheless generated, in the cities they visited, the kind of police presence that costs the taxpayer real money. Their first engagement was at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, an institution with deep royal associations, opened by Queen Elizabeth II in 1963, visited by Princess Diana and the then Prince Charles in 1985. The Sussexes moved through the wards with the particular attentiveness they bring to settings where the cameras follow and the subjects are vulnerable. They shook hands, they paused with patience, they posed for photographs. By any account, it was a genuinely warm set of interactions. And it was also, as their critics immediately noted, a set of interactions that derived its emotional weight entirely from the royal associations of the people conducting them. At the Australian National Veterans Arts Museum in South Bank, Meghan participated in an art session with veterans and their families. Harry attended the Movember Men's Mental Health event at the Western Bulldogs headquarters in Footscray. In Canberra, on the second day, Harry laid a wreath at the Wall of Remembrance at the Australian War Memorial, an act of genuine personal significance for a man who served in Afghanistan, who has worked for years with wounded veterans through the Invictus Games, and who founded that organization with a seriousness of purpose that his critics rarely acknowledge. It was there, in Canberra, at the Australian War Memorial, that the tone of the visit began to shift in the way that would ultimately reach London with the greatest force, because the Invictus Games, Harry's most substantive philanthropic contribution to the public life he left behind, are scheduled to be held in Birmingham in 2027. And King Charles, as head of the armed forces, is expected to attend. The question of whether Harry and his father might share a platform at those games has become, in the spring of 2026, one of the more loaded questions in royal family politics. And Harry's presence at the Australian War Memorial, fulfilling an act of ceremonial respect that working royals perform as a matter of routine, placed that question in sharp relief. On day 3 of the visit, Thursday, the 16th of April, Harry delivered the keynote address at the InterEdge Summit at the CENTREPIECE venue in Melbourne Park. The summit's stated focus was leadership, psychosocial safety, and human connection in the workplace. It was a paid ticketed event, with in-person tickets reported by various outlets to have cost in the region of $700 Australian. Harry was not paid for his keynote, according to reporting by Nine's Honey, though the event generated commercial revenue for the organizers, whose stated purpose is to support mental health education and crisis intervention programs. The speech lasted 19 minutes. And it was, by any fair reading of the available transcript and reporting from journalists who were present, a genuinely moving and personal account of grief, loss, and the particular difficulty of navigating both inside an institution that does not know what to do with them. Harry spoke about his mother, Princess Diana. He spoke about the experience of losing her when he was 12 years old. He said, in the portion of the speech that attracted the most subsequent attention, that grief does not disappear because we ignore it. He described having felt, in his own words, lost, betrayed, or completely powerless at various points in his life, and having been required to show up regardless, pretending everything was fine so as not to let anyone down. Speaking after his formal address with former politician Brendan Nelson, Harry was asked directly about the impact of Diana's death on his relationship to his royal role. His answer was direct. After my mom died, just before my 13th birthday, I was like, I don't want this role. Wherever this is headed, I don't like it. It killed my mom, and I was very much against it. He said he had buried those feelings for years. And he said that what eventually changed his perspective was a combination of military service, fatherhood, and a question he had begun asking himself. What would his mother want him to do? These were not the words of a man staging an attack on his family. They were the words of a man who has been navigating a complex, painful interior life in public for several years and who was speaking at a summit specifically designed to encourage honest conversation about the costs of suppressing that interior life. Royal analyst Amanda Matta, writing in her Substack newsletter, The Fascinator and cited by The Royal Observer on the 17th of April, noted with care, the grief and the alienation were the same beast, the impossible bind of mourning a parent while simultaneously being groomed to serve the system he associated with losing her. That is a serious observation, and it deserves to be received seriously. Harry was 12 when his mother died. He was required, 4 days after her death, to walk behind her coffin in front of a watching world. He has spoken, in various contexts over many years, about how inadequately that grief was processed, both within himself and within the family. The Melbourne speech was, in its emotional core, a continuation of that account. And the fact that it was delivered in a public setting at a commercial event does not by itself change the reality of the experience it described. At the same time, the context in which the speech was delivered matters. And it is the context, not the grief itself, but the packaging of it that produced the response it did in London. Before we go further into that response and into the question of what it reveals about where this family now stands, we would like to take a moment to invite you, if you are watching this channel for the first time, to consider subscribing. What we try to do here is different from what you will find in most royal coverage. We take time. We try to be fair to all the people in the story. We believe that an audience of intelligent, patient, emotionally engaged viewers deserves a story told properly rather than quickly. If that is what brings you here, the subscribe button is just below this video, and we would be genuinely pleased to have you with us. Now, the context. The Australia visit was officially described by the Sussex's office as a privately funded trip focused on charitable and commercial objectives, with specific attention to mental health advocacy, veterans affairs, and youth well-being. That description is accurate as far as it goes, But it is also, as Fox News Digital noted on the 16th of April in reporting by journalist Stephanie Nolasco, incomplete. Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, was scheduled to speak at a women's retreat in Sydney, organized by Gemma O'Neill of the Her Best Life podcast. Tickets for that event were priced at $2,699 Australian per person, rising to $3,199 for a VIP experience that included a group photograph with Meghan. The tickets were characterized by Kinsey Schofield, host of the YouTube channel Kinsey Schofield Unfiltered, in a quote to Fox News Digital, as a paid selfie with your favorite celebrity. That is a Comic-Con opportunity, not a British royal family move. The same reporting noted that Page Six had observed Meghan was also expected to hold commercial meetings in Sydney regarding her lifestyle brand As Ever, which had trademarked 12 products in Australia ahead of the visit. On the 15th of April, Australia's 10 News announced that Meghan would appear as a guest judge on MasterChef Australia. None of these activities were charitable. All of them were commercial, and all of them were occurring on a visit that carried the visible weight of the Sussex titles, a weight that derives its value entirely from the institution those titles come from. It was this combination, genuine charitable work and personal emotional honesty braided together with commercial activity conducted under the Sussex brand, that produced what Robert Hardman, author of The Windsor Legacy, described to Page Six as something that would stick in the gullet of the palace. Hardman had written, ahead of the visit, that palace aides would likely be perplexed, even annoyed by the tour, but that there was not a lot they can do about it. He was correct on both counts. What the palace could do, and what, according to multiple sources cited in reporting published by Fox News Digital and MSN in the days following the visit, was observe and draw its own conclusions. The conclusions being drawn by those close to William specifically were not new. They were a sharpening of positions already held. Royal expert Richard Fitzwilliams, speaking to Fox News Digital in reporting published on the 18th of April, was direct. William regards his brother as totally untrustworthy. He described William's prolonged silence toward Harry not as a wound and not as indifference, but as a deliberate choice. But William's silence isn't a mystery, he said. It's a strategy. That phrase says William's silence is a strategy that deserves to be unpacked carefully because it is easily misread. A strategy is not the same as coldness. A strategy is not the same as an absence of feeling. What Fitzwilliams and other analysts who have covered this situation over the past several years are identifying is something more nuanced. The decision by a man preparing to be king that the most effective way to manage a situation he cannot control is to refuse to engage with it publicly in a way that allows it to define him. Harry in Melbourne described an institution that had cost his mother her life. He described a role he had not wanted, had tried to bury his feelings about, and had ultimately found a way forward from through service and fatherhood. He did not name William. He did not attack William. But the speech existed within a context in which everything Harry says about the institution implies something about the person who remains inside it. And William, by all accounts, is acutely aware of that implication. What William will not do, and what every royal expert who has studied him in recent years confirms he will not do, is provide the kind of public rebuttal that would allow the conversation to become a dialogue. His absence from the conversation is itself the statement. By saying nothing, by continuing his own work at his own pace in his own way, William communicates a position that no statement could articulate as clearly. That the institution does not need to defend itself against this narrative because the institution's work speaks for itself. There is also a harder dimension to William's position that deserves honest examination. The Australia tour occurred at a particular moment in the royal family's calendar, a moment when King Charles III was managing a cancer diagnosis that, while reportedly responding well enough to allow for a reduction in treatment in 2026, remained a serious, ongoing health situation. When the Princess of Wales was in the later stages of her own recovery from a significant health challenge that had taken her largely out of public view for much of 2024. When the institution was carrying, as it always does, a weight of public expectation and private difficulty that does not make the news because it is not dramatic enough to attract it. Into that moment, Harry and Meghan arrived in one of the Commonwealth's largest countries, conducting what multiple outlets described as a tour that closely resembled an official royal visit without the formal designation. British broadcaster Helena Chard, speaking to Fox News Digital, put it plainly. This faux royal roadshow elevates the Sussex brand while undermining the very institution that gave them the platform. Kinsey Schofield added, "All they are doing in Australia is monetizing their titles and clinging to royal relevance, even though most of Prince Harry's family refused to take his phone calls." That is a pointed observation, and not a comfortable one, because it raises a question that sits at the heart of what this visit was. Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties in January of 2020 at the Sandringham Summit, where the late Queen Elizabeth II made clear that a half-in, half-out model, the arrangement by which they would retain their titles and some royal status while pursuing financial independence, was not available. The decision was made, clearly and finally, and both parties agreed to its terms. What the Australia tour represents, in the view of those closest to the palace, is not a violation of those terms in any formal legal sense. Harry and Meghan are private citizens. They can travel where they like. They can speak at whatever conferences will have them. They can conduct commercial business under whatever names they choose to trade under. But the titles they carry, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, are not private names. They are designations that carry the full historical and institutional weight of the British crown. And that weight is, in the view of critics who include the palace's own advisors, precisely what the Sussex brand is trading on. Royal expert Richard Fitzwilliams stated to Fox News Digital that William will almost certainly oppose the couple's attempt to ease themselves back into some sort of relationship with the royal family, as he doesn't trust them. He described a situation in which William's silence is the embodiment of institutional protection, a refusal to allow the monarchy to be drawn into a public engagement with a narrative that can only benefit the person controlling the narrative if the institution takes the bait. We want to pause here and reflect on something before we move to the larger picture this story is pointing toward. Those of you who have been watching this channel for some time will know that we try to hold all the people in these stories with the same care, not to take sides, not to celebrate or condemn, but to understand. And in understanding this particular story, it is important to hold two things simultaneously. Harry's grief is real. The trauma of losing a parent at 12 years old in the circumstances in which he lost her is real. The difficulty of navigating that inside the most scrutinized family in the world is real. And it is also true that the platform from which Harry has chosen to process that grief publicly, the title, the Sussex brand, the commercial infrastructure of the life he and Meghan have built in California, is one that derives its value and its audience from the institution he has described, in various forms, as having damaged him. Those two things are not easy to hold at the same time. But they are both true. And the tension between them is what makes this situation so genuinely complicated and so genuinely painful for everyone involved. The question of where the relationship between the brothers goes from here is one that the available reporting suggests has no simple answer. MSN's Australian edition, in reporting published on the 18th of April, cited sources saying William had ruled out any private reconciliation following the Melbourne speech. Royal commentator Robert Hardman, however, speaking to Fox News Digital, offered a more measured assessment. I mean, never say never in the royal game. Fitzwilliams added a further layer of complexity by noting that the Invictus Games in Birmingham in 2027 might yet provide a path, that Charles, as head of the armed forces, might feel an obligation to attend, and that such attendance could, in theory, create conditions for at least a managed degree of proximity between father and son. Whether that proximity, if it comes, translates into anything warmer is a question that no one currently in the picture can answer honestly. The conditions that would allow it, a genuine change in how each party understands the other's position, a willingness on William's part to accept that Harry's public life will always involve this particular tension, a willingness on Harry's part to acknowledge that the platform he stands on was built by the institution he critiques, have not, as of this writing, been met. What has been met is a different kind of clarity. The clarity of two positions that have hardened, over years of accumulating events, into something that feels less like a temporary estrangement and more like a permanent divergence. And not irreversible exactly. Few things in human life are truly irreversible. But settled in the sense that both men now occupy clearly defined places in a story that neither of them chose and neither of them, it seems, can fully leave behind. For William, the strategy is silence and service, the continued, unglamorous, disciplined work of an heir preparing for a reign he has been preparing for since childhood, who has made the calculation that the best possible response to a public narrative he cannot control is to build, quietly and day by day, a record of his own that speaks for itself. The visits, the engagements, the meetings with communities and organizations and individuals that attract a fraction of the media attention that his brother's activities generate, but that accumulate over time into something that the institution, and ultimately the country, will recognize as the real thing. For Harry, the strategy, and it is a strategy, whatever its emotional authenticity, is the opposite. Visibility, voice. The deliberate use of public platforms to continue processing, in real time, a life that was in many ways genuinely difficult, in ways that reach an audience that has made clear it wants to hear about it. Whether that strategy is sustainable, whether the appetite for the Sussex narrative remains at the level that justifies the commercial infrastructure it currently supports, is a question that the Australia tour's reception has left at least partially open. Sky News Australia, whose coverage of the visit was notably pointed, ran commentary throughout the 4 days that characterized the trip as a faux royal tour designed primarily to shore up the Sussex brand. The Herald Sun described it in similar terms. The 9 News survey, widely reported in Australian media, found that 88% of Australians polled opposed the use of taxpayer-funded police resources for the visit's security costs. These are not trivial data points. Australia is a country with a complicated and evolving relationship to the British monarchy, one in which the question of whether to retain the king as head of state is genuinely alive in public discourse. For Harry and Meghan to arrive in that context, conducting what was clearly, at least in part, a commercial operation, and to generate a majority opposition to the public cost of their security arrangements, is not the outcome that the stated purpose of the visit, to support mental health, to honor veterans, to promote youth well-being, would have hoped for. It is at this point in the story that we want to invite you once again to consider what it is you are watching and why. The level of detail, context, and care that we try to bring to stories like this one, the attempt to be fair to Harry's genuine grief and authentic advocacy work, while also being honest about the commercial context in which it unfolds, to understand William's silence without either celebrating it as heroic or dismissing it as cold, is what this channel is for. If you have found value in that kind of storytelling, we would be genuinely grateful for your subscription. The button is below, and every person who chooses to be part of this community makes the work possible. Let us now speak about the longer arc, because April 2026 does not exist in isolation. It is one chapter in a story that began in earnest in January 2020, when Harry and Meghan's decision to step back from their roles as senior royals was announced, and the months of negotiation that followed eventually produced the Sandringham Agreement and its conditions. It runs through the Oprah Winfrey interview of March 2021, the Netflix documentary of December 2022, and the memoir Spare, published in January 2023, in which Harry described, with a specificity that left no one in the family untouched, the texture of the experiences that had shaped his decision to leave. Each of those moments produced its own ripple inside the palace. The Oprah interview, with its allegations about race and about the family's response to Meghan's mental health difficulties, produced the most immediate and most damaging wave. The Netflix documentary produced another. Spare produced a third, and arguably the deepest, because its level of detail about specific incidents, specific conversations, and specific individuals left the impression that no future privacy claim could be entirely trusted. It was Spare, by most accounts, that most significantly altered William's assessment of whether a reconciliation of any kind was possible. Not because the book was unprecedented in the history of royal memoirs, it was not, but because it demonstrated a willingness to place private, intimate family moments into the public record in a way that, once done, cannot be undone. A conversation that is described in print is no longer a private conversation. A meeting that is characterized in a memoir is no longer a meeting whose participants can share a common understanding of what happened. The act of writing it down, whatever the emotional justification for doing so, changes the nature of the relationship between the people in the room. William, according to multiple sources and commentators over the past 2 years, drew a specific conclusion from Spare. that anything he said to Harry in any future private communication could potentially end up in a book, a podcast, a Netflix documentary, or a speech at a mental health summit in Melbourne. That is not a paranoid conclusion. It is a rational one based on the available evidence. And it is the specific calculation that Fitzwilliams is pointing to when he says William regards Harry as totally untrustworthy. Not untrustworthy as a brother in the emotional sense of the word, untrustworthy in the specific institutional sense. That the private and the public have become inseparable in Harry's life in a way that makes genuine private communication between them effectively impossible. The Australia tour did not create that situation. But Harry's Melbourne speech reinforced it, for reasons that have less to do with what Harry actually said, which was, in its factual substance, consistent with things he has said before, and more to do with what the speech's context communicated. A commercial event, a paid audience, a narrative structured to generate emotional engagement from a crowd, a framing that positioned the institution, and by implication the people inside it, as the source of damage that Harry was, in Melbourne, inviting the world to witness him processing. William, watching from thousands of miles away, was not being directly named. But he was being implicated. And the distinction between being named and being implicated is one that does not provide much practical comfort. The question that this video leaves us with is not an easy one. It is, at its core, a question about what family means when the people who constitute it have chosen fundamentally different lives. And when the choices each has made create irreconcilable tensions that cannot be resolved by goodwill or time or the passage of years. William and Harry were two boys who walked behind their mother's coffin in September of 1997 in front of a watching world and who have spent the decades since navigating what that experience meant and what it required of them. They have navigated it differently. They have arrived in different places. And the distance between those places, as of April 2026, has never been more clearly visible. That is not a triumphant observation. It is a sad one. Even for those who believe, as William's actions suggest he does, that the institution must be protected, that its authority must not be diluted, that the decision made at Sandringham in 2020 was the right one and must be upheld. Even for those who believe those things, the image of two brothers who grew up together, who share a loss that no other two people in the world share in quite the same way, who are now conducting their lives at opposite ends of a silence that shows no sign of breaking, that image carries a weight that no amount of institutional clarity makes lighter. The monarchy will survive this. It has survived abdications, scandals, wars, and the disappearance of the world it was built for, and it has found its way to the next chapter, every time. It will find its way past this. William is well equipped to lead it there. His preparation is thorough, his judgment is sound, and his commitment to the role is, by every available account, absolute. But the personal cost of that preparation, the specific cost of a man who has chosen the path of institutional duty watching his brother, choose a different path and concluding with the particular sadness that comes from a fully considered decision that the distance between those paths is now, in practical terms, final. That cost is real, and it deserves to be named as such. We want to thank you, as we always do, for giving this kind of storytelling the time it requires. The story of William and Harry is not a simple story. It resists the reduction that most coverage applies to it, the reduction to heroes and villains, to right and wrong, to the institution as cold machine and the individual as its helpless victim. The reality is more layered than that, and more human, and more sad. If you have found value in the attempt to tell it at that level of complexity, please subscribe before you leave. Please share this video with someone who follows the royal family with the same care you do. And please come back, because this story will continue and we will be here to follow it.